right, good evening. Welcome to Dark Side of Therapy with Nance, the show where we help newer clinicians get into the field, learn the skills necessary, and try to avoid burnout best we can. Tonight's very special because I'm sitting with Minot, North Dakota's Mayor Shaun Sipma, who's going to come on and tell us some things about mental health that he knows and understands, maybe share some secrets. And I'm so excited to have him because I'm always looking to learn new things from people in the community. So Shaun, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Absolutely. It is a pleasure to be here, and
Thank
certainly you know, was excited when you called, and looking forward to the conversation.
That's great. I'm going to start with, where did you grow up?
Great question. I'm a North Dakota boy.
Okay.
I grew up in a small town in southwestern North Dakota, Bowman, North Dakota. Our farm is about, the Sipma farm is about 27 miles northeast of there. Graduated out of Bowman High in '97, moved up to Minot, and came up here for broadcasting and baseball.
Wow.
And did a little bit of baseball in college, but got into broadcasting. Decided to make Minot my home. I got here and I fell in love with the community. And of course, through broadcasting, got to learn just about every different facet of the community. But long before the oil boom, you know, we got to do a lot of human interest stories and really get a good understanding of not just Minot, but the region. And of course, things as they progressed after I got out of broadcasting led me a little bit into politics, where I'm at now.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I'm going to ask you my first kind of off-color question. Do you have a favorite journalism movie?
Do I? So when it comes to watching movies, I don't like a ton of serious movies because there's too much seriousness in the world today. Right. So I love comedies. Okay. And of course, when you dig into comedies, the first one that comes to mind is, of course, Anchorman.
Absolutely.
Just for the stupidity of it and how much fun they poke at journalists. But it truly is one of my favorites, just for the idiocracy.
Gotcha.
Of what it is.
You don't have to think when you watch
exactly,
it. And
right.
I love movies like that too. What about Shattered Glass?
Shattered Glass, you know, I've seen it once. It's not one of those that I just go back and watch a ton of times, but a good movie. There's a lot of great movies out there that kind of highlight, I think, the seriousness of journalism, and then also where journalism has evolved too. I'm not a huge fan of where journalism is at now, which was actually one of the reasons I got out of it. Taking a look at the corporate models that have come to be, and I think society has seen how the skewed aspect of journalism has become. I'm not dogging it, but that's really what on the national level we've seen. Locally, you know, I think we still get a pretty good representation through the amount of Daily News, KMOT, and KX, and now the Dakotan is out there, which is an online platform, which is fantastic. But I think that local journalism is more important than ever today than it ever was before, just to have that local heartbeat.
Absolutely.
For the community.
I think mental health is a search for the truth. Isn't journalism kind of the same thing?
Absolutely.
We're trying to get to the core.
And that's really what I got, why I got into it, was to tell the stories of who people were. That's basically what journalism is most of the time. It's telling the story and sticking to the facts of what the story are, and let people then decide for themselves. That's the difference between, I think, a lot of what we see nationally and locally, and I think it's exceptionally important for folks to understand too. When you are watching a news story, reading an article, that is someone's, in some cases, opinion of what has happened. Right. And many times you have to go out and search for all of the facts to develop your own opinion on the matter.
Great point. And we all filter reality differently, don't we?
Absolutely.
So two people can read the same thing and walk away with something very different.
Without a doubt.
Boy, isn't that the case. So, Shaun, you've been an alderman, you've been a mayor, you've been a broadcaster, an insurance agent. I mean, you've dealt with a lot of people. Okay. And I have to ask, when you deal with difficult people, and let's classify that as people that don't agree with you or people who challenge you, what has your experience been like?
Well, it's been the entire gamut of experience, I think, when it comes. So keep in mind, too, the mayor position is a part-time position. So I'm still a full-time insurance agent.
Right.
I'm still a board member with Farm Rescue and the Farm Rescue Foundation, and still very active in that and a lot of other aspects. But dealing with the gamut of, let's call it, adversity when it comes to constituency, it's always important as a leadership, in a leadership role, to maintain calm and at times to de-escalate, which is very difficult in many circumstances, but to show empathy and to show understanding of what it is that they're trying to convey. I actually had this conversation with my son here just even recently.
Really?
He's coming into the, he's turning 16 soon, and he's talking about going into the workforce, and tried to convey to him on how to deal with people, interactions with people, and to understand that somebody might be coming to you on their worst day, somebody might be coming to you on their absolute best and worst days, and how do you deal with that? And being able to listen to them, show them that you're listening.
Right.
Physical, of course, posture is everything.
Yes.
The body language tells a story in and of itself.
That's true.
And then go through the process of either trying to help them or help them understand why you can't help them.
I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
When I say the word leadership, what comes to mind?
I think leadership comes to mind as lead by example, because in today's world, I think that speaks volumes in showing people that you're serious about what it is that you're doing. And also, leadership has to involve gathering as much information as you can and making decisions based on information. Right. And not feelings, not emotion.
Right.
That is probably one of the more difficult aspects for a lot of people to wrap their head around, because it's so easy to get wrapped up emotionally into something.
I agree.
And once you've gathered all of the facts and details, and even though that it may not be a popular decision to some that might be right in front of you, you have to base the decisions that you're making based on the facts rather than emotion.
I want to point out something you did, because to me, a good leader has to be a couple things. They have to be vulnerable. Now, this is my criteria. You don't have to agree. I think they have to be willing to be disagreed with, and I think they have to make unpopular decisions. You agreed to have the LGBTQ flag hung between the U.S. flag and the state flag. You got some flack for that. And you actually said the amount of hate that you took on was pretty profound, if I read correctly. And then you said these people came to you simply to be not hurt, not accepted, but to not be treated poorly. And you said that was necessary. I think that took courage. And I thought it's quite admirable, Shaun, that you would do that.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's probably one of the more difficult things that I've had to contend with in all of my time within our leadership. With my time in office, whether it's as mayor or as an alderman, and the main aspect when the folks came to me and asked to fly the LGBT flag. One, I looked at the facts. What was our policy in place? The policy was that if somebody came forward to hang a flag and the process was to come to the mayor, was there any reason not to?
Gotcha. Was
there any implications if I chose not to? And when they came forward and said, they're looking for nothing more than an understanding or a call for kindness. To me, that speaks volumes. Yeah. And knowing very well that there was a wave of probably anger coming, the decision had to be made for the community to do it for all of those reasons that I had just laid out.
Right.
Because if I chose not to fly that flag, now it's discriminatory. Right. And it absolutely goes, I think, the holistic aspect of what we are as a community, and that is a welcoming community.
Absolutely.
That is a community that takes care of itself.
Absolutely.
And had they come forward asking for something more than anyone else had asked for, I would have had a different opinion. But they were asking for the exact same, I think, acceptance that everybody else had that had come forward with that. And not that there were a lot. I mean, we did have the POW MIA flag that had been flown, and I remember the Norwegian flag flying at one point during the Host Fest. This was years ago. Right. But at that point, I knew that there was a lot of backlash that was coming, and that I also had to prepare myself for that and to accept what was coming.
Absolutely. But you were willing to be disliked.
Yeah, that's part of what part of being a leader is. You're not going to make everybody happy.
Absolutely.
And at times you're going to have some people very upset with you, and being able to accept that.
Absolutely. Mental health works the same way. I tell people every day things they don't want to hear, but they're truthful things, and if you allow it to sink in, you know what, there's a whole world that opens up if you're willing to listen, and that can be a skill that's tough to come by.
And it's not to say that that doesn't have an impact on a person.
Absolutely.
It takes a toll. Without a doubt it does. But at the same time, you also have to understand that in the role that I'm in, people have to look at that role as either someone who is who is willing to take the blows for the community, or someone who is willing to make the tough decisions, or someone that just rolls over. And that's, I try not to portray weak leadership.
Absolutely. And I don't think you do.
Well, I appreciate that.
Let's talk about who in Minot, in your opinion, is in the most need of mental health services right now? Not that I want to group people together necessarily, but just generally.
You know, boy, I think in today's world, and I don't want to generalize, but there's a good many people that need mental health. And I'm not talking about just those who are dealing with addiction. But if you take a look at a lot of folks in, and I would classify these as our young generation that's even in school.
You bet.
All the way up into folks that are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even our senior citizens. Now, that's not lumping them all together, but when you had asked me to come and speak on this, one thing came immediately to mind, and that's the impact of social media.
Yes.
And social media has had such a profound and in many ways a negative impact on so many people because of the immediacy of having information, whether it's right, wrong, or otherwise, and being able to now comment on that issue and really almost embolden them on their issue and have that conflict online without any true conversation.
Right.
Because there's listening that takes place in a conversation.
There is.
And there's a way to have a constructive conversation within disagreement, and that is lost on social media.
We could talk about this for hours because I have strong opinions too. Do you know there's research that actually shows that kids of today's day and age are developing their emotional skills later than any other point in recorded history? Cognitively, they're fine, but the screen time, they believe, is taking away their ability to face-to-face process with their parents, you know, that emotional tie. And I think that's very true. I think we're losing that. We never used to assess screen time in our mental health assessments. We do now. I want to know how many times you're looking at that phone per hour or per day. And we're talking hours.
Oh, absolutely.
It's amazing to me. And I don't see it slowing down. And that's what scares me. So I'm glad we have the same fear because I think it's very warranted.
I think a lot of parents would do the best thing, and you know, it's not to say that my kid doesn't game. Absolutely,
he's got
an Xbox.
Sure.
I spend a little bit of time on Angry Birds. That's my decompression at night. I still have the original Angry Birds.
Really?
You know, yeah, I do. It's
That's
just
great.
It's like my zone out 45 minutes. But when you talk about a lot of screen time, and you talk about whether it's Snapchat or Twitter or Facebook or whichever platform that you're talking, TikTok's another one. I don't even have that one downloaded.
Yep, that's probably a good idea.
When they spend literally hours and hours and hours and hours on this one, and I was really encouraged even when my 15-year-old said, you know, he just doesn't like social media because of all of the conflict that takes place and the cyberbullying and things like that. I think the best thing a lot of parents could do is get their kids off of social media. And for themselves too, limit their own, you know, even if it's just once a day. I mean, people like to catch up with their family.
Absolutely.
Post a picture for the family group on Facebook or whatever it is, but limit that time, and it's amazing how that really can change a lot of perspective. And I'll use my wife now as an example, who used to spend a lot of time on social media prior to me becoming mayor. When I did, that immediately had an effect on her mental health. And we both made a decision that we were going to get off the groups and we were going to somewhat take a big step back away from it. Now, she has an online business, so she's got some stuff that she has to do.
Sure.
And I, as mayor, also have to communicate, whether it's through email or a lot of people do instant messaging rather than picking up a phone, which I wish they'd pick up a phone.
Absolutely.
Or even set up a meeting. But we've made that decision to limit that for our own mental well-being, simply because I could immediately tell it was taking a toll even on me and my family.
They have workshops where you actually, maybe you've heard about these, you get away to camp for a couple days and you got to turn your cell phone in to kind of reset your brain. I think that's great.
We call that the farm.
You
go down there because it's limited cell phone reception, and
that's right.
You just disconnect.
You're going to be voluntarily disconnected from things.
And it's great.
So we're in Minot. We're in the Midwest here. Do you think Minot, mental health-wise, the needs of Minot are different than, say, other towns in North Dakota or the country at large? Do you think there's a difference regionally?
I think North Dakota is very similar in the sense of in the sense of that mental health. I think nationally it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
We can transition right into 2020 and 2021
Yep.
on what happened there with the disconnect of everyday interaction.
Yep.
I think we're doing a lot better than a lot of other places around the country
Yeah,
because
sure.
we were a lot more open, good, bad, or otherwise. And I always preface this by saying in no way am I discounting any of the heartache, hardship, or otherwise that was taking place, even some loss of life because of COVID. That can't be understated. But by and large, I think we've done better than the rest of the country. I did some traveling out to Washington, D.C. recently for, actually over the last year, for some trips for Task Force 21 and some other efforts on behalf of the city of Minot. But it's a different world there.
Yeah, I bet.
Very limited access anywhere. Very few businesses are open, even on a what I would call regular working hour paradigm compared to what we have. So in many ways we're doing a lot better, but we still have the same challenges that many other places have, simply because of that connectivity to social media. And now that also then quickly pivots into the narcotic world that we are, like many, if not the entire country, is facing. That's one of the biggest challenges I think that we haven't wrapped our hands around.
I agree.
And we need more than just the city of Minot. We need more than the county. It would have to come at a state level to address that, because if you don't take into account the mental health aspect of it, you're never going to conquer it.
You just took the words out of my mouth, because the comorbidity is almost 100%. You don't get addiction without mental health issues. And I almost feel like we penalize people for it, though. You know, we have this kind of punishment mentality when addictions are very serious. They aren't fun to live with, but I think we do. I think we have a punishment model. I don't know how you see it, but
well, when you talk about addiction too, I mean, we're not talking just about alcohol or drugs. It can be anything from gambling. It can be everything from social media to just about anything out there. There's some people that shop too much online.
Absolutely.
That might be a little bit easier to solve, but I'm not an expert there, and I'm not going to pretend to be. But in the realm of addiction, my understanding of it, and I'm not a clinical psychologist by any means, but I think the main thing is to have a support entity, group, person, and someone just to talk to.
Absolutely.
And if you don't have that person, all of that weight rests right on yourself, and it almost becomes that self-deprecating feeling.
Absolutely. See, the AA people have known this for years, because that's what they do. They get together with an environment where you're not going to be shamed for having the addiction, and you're going to be accepted, and we will listen to you. We will listen to your pain. And you don't have many places like that in the world. One
I think, aspect where we saw the community, I think, help itself substantially, we dial back to 2011.
Yes.
With all of that devastation and heartache.
Yes.
You know, my home, my neighborhood, many of my friends, my mother and father-in-law's house, so many of our community members were heavily impacted. And in a way, it was very beneficial to have so many of those people having to shelter in neighbors' houses up on the hill.
Right.
Sometimes complete strangers, but they had somebody there to talk to.
Right.
Somebody, a shoulder to cry on, somebody to lean on through those hardest times. And even during the rebuilding, I think where we saw some of the hardships is when people went into the FEMA trailers. Now they're back kind of in that isolation again, but being able to get out of those and being able to, I think, lean on each other, it was kind of the not purposeful aspect of healing, but it was kind of that tertiary benefit in a way.
Right, absolutely. So you lived through that.
I did. Lost the house and was displaced for just shy of 4 years.
Wow.
And that by far was the hardest thing that my family's ever had to go through. And, you know, as a journalist at that time, reporting on my own home being destroyed and you know, dealing with the neighborhood and all of the changes in the community amidst an oil boom, that was a very difficult time for many, many people.
Absolutely. You know, we talk about trauma a lot in mental health, and I think the term gets overused at times, but this is the very definition of trauma. Losing your house, losing all your valuable possession. What's that like, if I can ask you?
It's difficult. There's no two ways around it. And it's so different for every single person because I compartmentalize things very quickly in my life. That's
Yes.
how I deal with them.
Yep.
And for me, I immediately, once I kind of learned that my house was going to be destroyed, accepted the fact that it's a piece of property. It is not something that is absolute, that defines me as a person or as for our family.
Right.
And then just taking things one step at a time, not taking the whole big picture and throwing it on my shoulders, and trying to let it overcome me. Right. Not everybody can do that, and it's not that I'm discounting anybody who can't. I know it had a very different effect on my wife. I know it had a different effect on a lot of my neighbors that simply just couldn't come back. Many people identify their home as their place of sanctuary.
Absolutely.
The safest place they can be. I just literally decided that it was going to be, okay, we'll deal with the devastation. If we can rebuild, fine. If not, we'll make a house somewhere else, and we'll make that sanctuary somewhere else. And dealing with that in that respect. Now, I don't know if that's the healthiest way or not, but it worked for me.
I wish there was an easy way to say we all deal with things the same way, but we don't. I wonder if Minot has a trauma hangover, though, for a lot of people that have never dealt with the fallout of what happened, even if it was 10, 11 years ago. We think about devastation like the hurricanes in Florida and Louisiana and the wildfires out west, but I haven't been in Minot very long, just 3 years, and my girlfriend at the time said, "You've got to watch a video of what happened in Minot, because how bad can it be?" And you watch that aerial view. I mean, it doesn't even look like the same town. I mean, it's just, everything is so different.
I shot that video, by the way.
You did. Well, it made an impact, let me say that. And she was pointing out the different things I couldn't recognize. And she lost her house and very much was traumatized because that was her sanctuary. And I just wonder how many people have never come forward to deal with the trauma of the experience, Shaun.
Believe it or not, I think I could answer that question.
Okay, that's great.
When we had our 10th anniversary down at Oak Park, this past June 26th, it was on a Saturday, and it was very lightly attended. Not because a lot of people didn't want to, because a lot of them weren't ready to. And I had a lot of people tell me that when we started going through and putting together the program. It wasn't a celebration. It was more of a coming together and acknowledging what happened, but also showing how far we've come as a community. Right. And to see, when we have a food truck festival and we've got a few adult beverages and lots of food, when you have 7,000 people show up for that, and when you only have 350 show up for the 10th anniversary,
good point.
That still speaks volumes to me of how hard that was on the community and continues to be.
Wow. Are people afraid of the stigma of mental health in Minot? Are they afraid of asking for help because of how it's going to make them look?
I think most people are afraid of asking for help when it comes to mental health. I sit on the Farm Rescue Board, and the high overview of that is we go out and assist farm families in crisis, whether it's a serious illness, injury, or natural disaster. Okay. Now, I will quantify this as North Dakota as a whole because we have a lot of the same kind of, we're going to do it on our own, and we don't like to ask for help. Right. And most of the time, our cases end up being referrals because many people, especially farm and ranch families, they're single operators. In many ways, that's what a household is, even if you're not a farm family. And to ask for help is something almost of an indignation. It's a sign of weakness. Yes. And in the farm rescue side, we end up reaching out, and many times we're able to, tell them the story of this is why we're here, this is what we do. That's not the case outside of that realm. There's not a lot of people reaching out to help in those respects. So I think it is very much a Midwestern thing where we don't like to ask for help. And that's very evident in Minot, good, bad, or otherwise. Yep.
Well, I didn't want to start. I'm from Oregon originally, the West Coast, and I would say the kind of mood out there is much different than here. This is more of it feels siloed into me at times where people kind of do their own thing. And I do think people don't ask for help as much out here. So I'm glad I got that right. But I think for anybody, there's weakness, there's vulnerability, there's stigma attached to it. My God, if you can't solve it on your own. But I think about the mental health crises we're facing. You mentioned it, the social screen time, the social media, the pandemic. we need to ask each other for help. We need to.
Well, and even during the pandemic, so that was, and we should preface this, when this whole thing kicked off in 2020, we had the first case in North Dakota. I'd taken a phone call from the governor, then from the base wing commander, and the list went on and on and on. Minot was the first place, and we really didn't know a heck of a lot about it, and there was absolutely a lot of fear because the only reports we had were coming in from Europe, and they were all bad. Right. We didn't know if this was something that was airborne, contractual, that meant immediate high mortality rate. Right. So there was a tremendous amount of fear, and fear leads to a lot of other, troublesome issues with mental health. The one benefit I had, where I was, on the phone constantly talking with people, is that I reached out to a lot of the different pastors in the community and different religious connectivity points, and a couple of them I know very well, and we were able to spend a little time on the phone talking, and believe it or not, that, again, kind of that secondary effect was just being able to communicate and, share some real stresses that were going on. And I think that that's where a lot of folks just have a tough time reaching out. Yeah. And it is difficult to ask for help. And if nothing else, to just talk.
I always feel like when somebody calls me for the first time, how courageous that is, because you don't know what you're getting into, what kind of therapist you're getting, and I think it's such bravery that folks do that. I want to address the issue of kids and mental health, because this is something that comes up a lot. I think kind of gets downplayed. Do you ever hear from schools, Shaun, about mental health issues with the kids, things that are happening? Do the schools reach out to you to talk about some of the issues, or does that ever come your way?
It came up more during the pandemic. Okay. A lot of times, because we are two kind of governing boards, the school board and the city are separate, but when we were on those phone conversations and endless Zoom meetings during 2020 and 2021, right. It was very noticeable, having discussions with the superintendent and with other educators, that they noticed it during the virtual learning sessions. Right. And they, one of the aspects too that they noticed, or there was a void of notice, is that having those kids in school, in learning, again, that's where we, I think, succeeded, where a lot of the other country suffered dramatically, was for a lot of kids, that's where their stability in life is at, is in-person learning in school, having a teacher as that authoritative figure in life, helping to give them structure. They may not have that at home. And we heard a lot during the pandemic. Not that it's over or whatever it is today. I don't even know what you want to qualify.
It's tough to quantify that.
Yeah. But it was very evident, and we talked a lot about that.
That's great.
Over the last couple of years. And I think getting those kids back for all of 2021 school year made a tremendous impact and improvement comparative to a lot of other places in the country. But that's just, let's say, a cog in the big picture of mental health, because there's still, and I unfortunately don't have all of those communications on a regular basis, simply because it's not my realm of the leadership paradigm. But if the social media is any aspect of what's going on throughout society, it's only magnified at that younger age.
I agree. And they're so helpless against it. And I think parents don't know what to do, because they're being advertised to so strongly. I mean, there's an iPhone commercial every 20 minutes. I mean, and you got to have it, because if you don't, you're not going to be cool. And so when I hear that, you've got a kid that actually doesn't want to be on social media, I don't hear that very often. I hear parents fighting with their kids. And then they try to enforce the rules. The kid rebels. Parent doesn't want to hear it, so they just give in, because it's easier than having to deal with the fallout. And that's the world we live in now. And it is unfortunate.
And we grew up in a different time.
We did.
I mean, I grew up literally doing the dial-up internet, and grew up before. Of course, we remember a time before that. But the kids today don't know a world without it, and it's part of their identity.
Right.
And one of the other aspects, and this is going to date me a little bit, but you take a look at how interactive parents are with their kids, whether it be school, sports. whether it be activities and things like that outside of, and I know mom and dad work full time.
Yep.
That's our household.
Yep.
How can we engage those kids that gets them off their phone?
Right.
You know, how many people take their kids camping or have time to take their kids camping?
Right.
You know, we do a lot of hunting in our family. We do a lot of fishing. We do a lot of different activities that are just outside of the house. Yeah, and it's, you put the phones away, and
Right.
yeah, we might snap a picture of Dad and Jack's walking through the Cedar Creek system, but I can tell you the phone doesn't come out the entire time that we're out in the farm.
Wow. I admire that because that's not the case with most people.
Yeah.
And I think we miss out on so much. There's actually what they call the dopamine effect, where you intermittently reinforce this dopamine good feeling in your brain by all the swiping and tapping, and so it renders other activities less meaningful because you're so hyped up on the dopamine effect. I'd never thought about that until I heard a presenter say, I thought, my goodness, I do this too. I'm reaching for my phone every hour. I'm part of the problem, but it's really tough to stop. But
And one of the things people often forget too is you miss so much.
Yep.
You really do. If
do.
you're out on vacation and on your phone, what is it that you're getting away from, but you're really not?
Right.
And I think that very well should be almost an efforted point for parents at any given moment. Whether it's just going to a Minotauros game or a baseball game, leave the phones in the car.
I was thinking the same thing. Like when I go to a Vikings game, that thing's not coming out because I want to watch the game. Now, we're going to irritate some people having this conversation. I think that's fine, though, because...
Oh, well.
That's the way it is, because this is a mental health problem. And I'm really glad that you brought it up before I did, because I see it every day. Our attention spans are waning. We don't have the same level of focus. And we'll call it ADHD, we'll give it a title. But I think what's really happening is our brains are not capable anymore of slowing down the way they used to be. And if we keep reinforcing this, we're going to have to teach people in a whole new way, and that's not a good thing. But I think it's coming, unless we make it, a real strong decision to say enough. But how are we going to do that?
Well, I think there was a little test moment inadvertently here not too long ago when Snapchat and Facebook went offline for almost a full day.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to watch people's reactions.
Yep.
On what that meant for their life.
Yeah. it might as well have been the end of the world, right?
In many ways.
Yep.
But I think that it's going to have to be a concerted effort. We're going to have to retrain ourselves. Take the extra effort as parents, as individuals, to spend less time virtually and spend more time in person. I do this a lot of tests. Going back to the mayor thing, when somebody emails me a complaint or an issue or something that they want to have done, my first immediate response is, what's your phone number? I want to give you a call.
Yeah.
Unless I'm buried up to my eyeballs in other things. But
Sure.
by and large, I try to have a phone call, or can we get together and talk? And there is a substantial hesitancy in both of those, quite a bit. Not so much with the older generation.
Yeah.
If you're over 60, they love phone calls.
It's great, right?
But that is one thing I truly try to effort, on the side of communicating, because even at the city, we send out newsletters, we send out e-letters, we broadcast through social media, all of our council meetings and other things. But that's our effort to get the information out. The irony is most of what is talked about online isn't what was on that video. It was what somebody else wrote. And whether or not there was any fact in it or not is, immaterial at this point. But that's tends to be where we end up interacting most, is off of other posts, not off of what we had actually pushed out.
That's a great point. I don't normally throw a quote out there if I can't name the author, but I forgot who said, what controls your attention controls your life. And boy, is that not the case.
That absolutely is.
It is.
Today more than ever. And
Yeah.
we even take a look at some of what's going on. So we're a society of short attention span, and all of a sudden there was a huge pivot just in the last 7 days. We went from nothing but pandemic to now Russia and
Great point.
What's going over in the Ukraine and Eastern Europe. And we talk about mental health. That absolutely has an effect here.
You bet.
Not only do we have military families that serve in the United States Air Force and protect our country. Those families now are at a heightened mental state because of really what some of the threats that have been made from a very powerful leader all the way around the world,
Right.
you know, threatening nuclear annihilation. And then you also take Minot with our strategic position as the only dual nuclear mission base in the entire world.
Right, right.
So we're never on a shortage of, in today's world, of almost crises to try to deal with.
That's a great point. Louis C.K. is a very controversial comedian, but he said something I love, which was in the United States, we have the option of telling kids about death and war. You know, we don't have to, we get to decide when they're going to know these things. But for these kids, think about in the Ukraine, they get to grow up with this and see it firsthand. In the Middle East, this is what they see. There's death everywhere. And I think about that too, how lucky we are in some ways that we get to kind of time when we introduce these horrible things. Some people don't have a choice. And talk about that kind of trauma where it's just thrust upon you.
And you know, even in North Dakota, we talked about, you know, comparative here to maybe the rest of the country when we saw a lot of the civil unrest in a lot of the other areas around. You mentioned Oregon, Portland, and all of the chaos that went out there.
Yep.
We're in many ways fortunate that geography is at our advantage in that respect, and we have not had to deal with the social unrest in many respects too. But it is something that too we also have to educate ourselves and our children on, because that is something, if they move away, or God forbid it ever come here, that we do have to mentally prepare ourselves to face adversity, because at some point adversity is going to be front and center in our lives. And how are we going to deal with that?
That's a great question. Let me ask you this moving forward. How is Minot going to keep dealing with the adversity that is going to be coming its way again and again and again? What are the Minot people going to do?
Well, I think we're going to do what we've always done, is that we continue to plan forward and work through whatever it is that's next. And I think where we've pivoted from now is, rather than solely relying on being reactive, and I'm not talking just about the flood walls that we're building or having emergency plans, but I think it's more planning, strategic planning on how we're going to do that. One aspect I can tell you, and it's a shortfall in the emergency management plan, not just here, but probably everywhere. You know, we've got volumes in how to deal with railroad derailments, flooding, now pandemic, but very few paragraphs, chapters, or anything deal with the mental health on how society rolls through that. Where we've been very, I think, fortunate and successful is we're still a big, small community where we're able to lean on each other and have those hard conversations and help each other through that. But I think going forward, that is something that we as a society have to better plan for.
Well, and do we as clinicians have to step up, Shaun, go to the city council meetings and say, hey, you need to listen to this? Are we doing enough? Because I don't know, but I want to know what you think. Are we as the clinicians doing enough?
It's a really good question. I don't know if I know the answer to that. The one challenge we always have, that there's only so much the government can do. At the end of the day, there is only so much that we can do.
That is true.
In the case of the city, we don't have Health and Human Services. Now, Ward County does. We're all residents of Ward County. They do have mental health services. Are they proactively going out? I can say it's available. It's there. Is it enough? I don't know. I would venture to guess the answer to that is no, only because of the challenges, and most of that has to deal with funding and accessibility, and not shortcutting that, but that is the world that we live in today, and there really is only so much that the government can do to fix our own lives. And I think that the more we accept that and understand that, is that the moment that we have to take some of that responsibility on our own shoulders to help fix it.
Well, I agree. You're talking about empowerment. I'm not sure we do that well either, but yeah, I don't want to solve my clients' problems. I want to give you the tools so you can solve the problem. But it becomes kind of a slippery slope because some people want the easy, cheap answer, and that's never the right way to go.
Well, getting through adversity is never easy.
Never. No.
I don't care what benchmark you're talking about.
Absolutely. And you get a story that comes out of that you can then tell. See, I'm a big believer that your trauma story defines who you are. So just like you going through losing your house, how horrible. But I listened to the way you told your story. and it's one of resilience. I'm not saying you're not traumatized, but I'm saying the way you told it said that you've healed from this to some extent.
To some extent.
To some extent, sure. But it's all in how you tell the story. You aren't a victim to this.
Well, and I think that that's where we as a society and holistically, big picture, we either have victims or we have warriors.
Yeah.
And
Good point.
the point is, you know, we can absolutely choose on which one we're going to be. We just have to make that determination for ourselves. Absolutely. Was that case devastating? Without a doubt. But you can choose on whether or not you're going to see yourself as a victim and move beyond that and not let it weigh you down, or you can choose to let it, in many ways, and I don't say choose because that might be the wrong word.
I get it. Yeah.
Not let it overcome you. And again, every person is so different that has a different capacity for dealing with adversity. And I think that that's where my understanding of mental health is far lacking, because I am who I am, and
Sure.
I can at least appreciate that not everybody has that ability to just kind of let it brush off
Absolutely.
and push beyond.
And I like the fact that you recognize it's very individual in how people were raised there. I mean, everything shapes us. I mean, don't tell me it doesn't. And then there's genetics. So we all are very different. But I think most people can learn resilience if we're patient with them and we support them. I absolutely do. I think it's really hard to teach, but I think it can be done.
One of the more real moments when I was going from door to door as a journalist, from devastated house to devastated house, doing interviews. It was a little bit easier because I was connected to the disaster myself, and being able to stand there and watch probably some of the most hardened individuals, man or woman, just break down because of the weight that was resting on their shoulders, trying to deal with the devastation.
Right.
And not to say every single person had the right to, but I also watched a lot of people that probably I wouldn't have expected to rise well above that and do things that most people aren't capable of.
Right, right.
So it's amazing to see the spirit in many people be able to do that.
Absolutely. And the Midwest is not lazy. I'll say that. These are hardworking folks. So I woun't want to go out there and buck hay all day. So I give them a lot of credit. A couple more things I want to bring up, and I so appreciate the time you're spending with us today. Minot's got a lot of good mental health resources. I did kind of a quick check of just how many agencies and providers we have, and it's up there. It's 50, 60, and that doesn't even include the workers within the different agencies. So we have a lot of good people here, specializing in trauma, war trauma, obsessive compulsive disorder, eating disorders. I mean, we've got a lot of resources here. That makes me very happy.
When we talk about the community as being resilient, you hit a very key word there, because that's a key word that we use a lot as our community, not only within our resiliency program that we've got to help the community recover better from any future natural disaster, but resiliency within our community for a region our size. We do have a lot of resources that are available. I think a lot of places around the country would pine, for days over what we have for a community, for a region our size. And
yes.
I think that speaks a lot to the region itself and how it really truly wants to help itself. You take a look at all the nonprofits that are around the community,
right.
whether it's mental health or whether it's other charities that are set up to help people that are less fortunate. It's a very giving community. It's a very I think motivated community to help each one of us should hard times arise.
I love that, and certainly we have the resources. So if people have the courage to use them, great, and I hope that they do. This has been so great, and what I've enjoyed about the interview, Shaun, is your transparency, because you came in here and just showed me what you are, and I love that. That's good leadership, and you've been through some stuff, and you have, I think, a very good handle on the needs of the community. So that tells me you listen to people, and what a great thing.
Well, thank you. I'm not going to say that I'm unique in any way. I'd like to think that there's a lot of people around North Dakota that are the same way. One of the hardest things for most folks to do is to kind of bare your soul,
right.
And it's nothing that I've changed since that I got into politics. That's anybody who knows me. That's who I've been as a journalist. That's who I was before that, and that's how I was kind of raised growing up. But you know, it's I think an attribute that a lot of folks do have. I think where we need to work on as a community is helping those that you know, probably struggle with that to be able to, you know, reach out and ask for help, or to you know, understand that there are some challenges in this life that we can't tackle all by ourselves.
Absolutely. And there's freedom in that vulnerability. If we can get folks there, it's just getting them there. This has been so great. I want to say thank you so much. I know you're a busy man, and you gave us a lot of good material today. And I will probably quote you in a few weeks when I talk to another person about leadership. I'll say, Shaun was here, and I found myself a good leader. So I want to say thank you very much.
I appreciate that. And thank you for doing this, because, again, it's communicating.
Yeah.
If the more that we can talk about our challenges, the easier it is to try to find solutions to those.
I totally agree. And if I can model vulnerability, somebody else can. And that's, again, I'm so passionate about that. So
fantastic.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. This is Dark Side of Therapy. Thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Sipma and I will see you in a few weeks. If you like this video, please subscribe and please hit like. Thank you.